part of our Emergent Speaker Series, reading the Model Minority Stereotype. My name is Stephanie Smith, and I'm the program coordinator in our department. And our department provides integrative educational experiences for students, faculty, and staff to facilitate critical conversations around sociocultural identity development, social justice, and the interplay between power and identity. And I'd like to encourage everyone to please feel free to grab our flyers out front. They're both flyers for individual events and our quarterly calendar we come out with. We have ranging between 25 and 30 events a year, which are all open to you. And you can also follow us. Somebody knock on the door. That's not part of the program, so I don't know about that. We also encourage you to sign up for our email list, and you can get updates on all these events coming up. And also follow us on social media. In the back of the room, you'll see all our information for following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We'd love for you to get connected with us online and to come to our physical space. Downstairs on the first floor, Student Center 105 is our departmental offices. We have computers there for you guys to work at workstations. Also great study spaces and hangout spaces. So please come down, reclaim that student space and use it. It's there for you. Come visit us. So now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Nicholas Hartlep, and he is the Assistant Professor of Educational Foundations at Illinois State University. Previously, he was an Advanced Opportunity Program Fellow at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and Urban 13 University, where he earned his PhD in the Social Foundations of Urban Education. He is a former public school teacher and has taught in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and abroad. He is also an author with works including The Model Minority Stereotype, Demystifying Asian American Success, and co-editor of Unhooking from Whiteness, The Key to Dismantling Racism in the United States. Dr. Hartlep's interest in counseling and transracial adopted family dynamics stems from the fact that he was adopted from Seoul, Korea when he was approximately 16 months old. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nicholas Hartlep to DePaul University.
Thanks for that introduction, Stephanie, and I want to thank her publicly for making this event possible. I had an opportunity to speak yesterday and obviously today, so thank you for attending. I'd like to begin today with a joke that my 7-year-old shared with me on the phone as I was driving north to your lovely city of Chicago. So, what has 4 eyes but can't see? Anyone? Guess? Any guess? No. Mississippi. Oh. Okay. Some of us are like, we're processing that joke. All right. I want to really talk about the model minority stereotype, and when I mean reading it, I mean I'm talking about a reader, a book that I edited with that name, but I'm also thinking about reading through a prism of literacy and also life experience. So I start with a picture circa, I would say, middle school, because man, I can't remember having lockers, right? And having lockers, that was just so cool, right? Organizing them and all that, and the Jolly Green Giant, oversized T-shirt and Jinko jeans. My attire has gotten a little bit better, I think, but it was during K-12, this time period, sitting in classrooms like all of you have done and are currently doing in college, listening to my teachers, what they said and what they taught me supposedly. And I was reading books, clearly, but I was reading what they said, what they did, their behaviors. I was reading the curricula. I was reading the social dynamics of the school in which I attended. It was a primarily white school in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And yes, I am a Packer fan, so I will not forgive us when we beat the Bears. However, that's a different topic. So today I want to talk about the model minority stereotype and reading it through, again, this lens of literacy. Specifically, Paulo Freire and Donaldo Macedo, who wrote a lovely book, Literacy, Reading the Word and the World. And they were really talking about different forms of literacy and what it means to be literate. Certainly there are illiterate people in the United States and in the world who cannot read words. However, I would argue those same illiterate individuals perhaps are unable to read a novel, are literate in ways you and I are not literate. They read the world through their life experiences, right? And so I'm getting at this notion of being a critical, literate person, to read the word and the world and see how they match or mismatch, okay? I think of another, it's kind of famous, well-known for those people in the field of education, especially foundations of education, Neil Postman, who wrote, "Children enter school as question marks, but they leave as periods." Now, I want to engage you today, so let's have a little discussion here. What might that quote mean? What might Neil Postman be thinking about when he said that? Actually, he wrote it. What might that whole idea, kindergarten, they enter kindergarten, you know, I'm a former teacher. The kids, the children enter as question marks, but they leave high school as periods. What might that think? Take a shot at it. Yes?
Well, I mean, it could just mean that they enter questioning and they leave with an answer, but I would suspect it means something more like they leave with like you're very curious, but then you go through these years of school and you leave with like this one answer possibly, and maybe it means your curiosity is crushed in a sense. I'm not sure, but something along those lines.
I think you're spot on. I think you're absolutely right. Think of little kids. You might have children of your own, but you might have nieces, nephews, brothers, and sisters, little kids, right? And they always ask you questions. Why? Why? But why? They always, right? Can you attest, is that true? Right? Mm-hmm. They're always asking questions. They're always curious. They want to know. But somehow, during the educational process, that shuts off, and it becomes more of receivership. Is it going to be on the test? Is this going to be on the ACT, SAT test? What, right? And there is no love of knowledge for knowledge's sake. It's very much, I'll do what you tell me. I won't question the veracity, right? Do any of you challenge your professors in the classroom, or do you just take it as truth? Well, I hope you're question marks and you're really pushing back as opposed to just receiving that knowledge. So, I already shared a picture telling you about my life in the classroom. Always a question mark. I still am a question mark to this day. The day I die, I will be a period. The end. Nicholas. Obituary. Until that time comes, I will always be critiquing, challenging, pushing back, asking questions, right? And so I begin by sharing my research. The first book here really was a book of looking at all of the writing on the model minority stereotype. Literally, I did read. I read the model minority stereotype. And all of that work really worked toward the model minority stereotype project. While this is loading the website, I'll tell you, the model minority stereotype project is a website that chronicles all of the writing on the topic. So if you go to this website, you can Google Model Minority Stereotype Project. You will find this website. And 496 pieces specifically targeting this stereotype and writing about it. Just in this year, 2014, I believe there's 15 articles published on this topic. So it's continued to get traction from the day it was created in America, which was 1966. in January. That's really the genesis and the birthing of this stereotype. Now, I'm going to talk to you about this book today, The Reader. And in this book, this project, I was really interested in putting together a resource for students and for teaching faculty, because I'm a teacher educator. All of my students are studying to become teachers. They're pre-service teachers. In fact, just last week, we were up here in Chicago, and I brought my students, and they were in the Chicago Public Schools. The book really talks about a lot of important aspects of the stereotype for us to understand it and why it's a myth. And I'm going to talk to you about those items today. Well, you might be asking, well, what is the model minority stereotype? By a show of hands, who here has a familiarity with that term? You may have heard it before in a class or outside. Okay, raise your hand if this is a completely new term for you today. Wonderful. If it's new, hopefully you'll get something today and it will make you curious to ask more questions. But Lee and Wong and Alvarez in 2009 defined the model minority stereotype as a stereotype of Asian Americans that promotes the image of Asian Americans as uniformly successful in terms of economic, educational, and social capital. Kim's 1986 dictionary entry defines the model minority stereotype as a concept that implies that other minorities should emulate Asian Americans in their thought and behavior. In its purest sense, then, the model minority stereotype is the belief that Asian Americans do not suffer discrimination, are problem-free in many areas of their personal and professional lives, and they are well integrated into dominant society. I would say that's false. And here is a great illustration of that for you.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean. But I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
I'm Shasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place in my apartment. I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
No, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! To you, this here's 14, double, toil and trouble. Mind the gear, beware Jack the Ripper, bloody hell! Pippin, cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
So what dynamic is going on in this skit here? This whole discussion, this exchange, where you from, all of that. What's going on here? Let's read this situation.
You see someone with like Asian descent and immediately thinks they're I guess foreign, and so you just asking her where are you from? If she's in San Diego, no, not there. You know, all your origins against him. When she did the same thing to him, he thought it was weird that she asked that question, even though he just did it to her.
Yeah, I like that term, especially that you said foreign, because you're absolutely right. Other thoughts? What dynamic is going on here? Have you ever heard of this before? Like you got Asian friends, Asian American friends, or you've seen it in the public square or here at the campus. Why? Why do we, I won't say we, because I certainly don't do that, but why do some people say that and they feel licensed to say such or ask such questions? Yeah.
I think it's a combination of the sort of like fetishization of Asian culture that happens a lot, especially I'm from California, and there's a really significant Asian population, and I have a lot of white friends who like deeply fetishize either Korean or Japanese usually popular culture, and then also this perception that if it's not an overtly negative stereotype, it's sort of okay to say it. It's like okay to assume that someone buys into all these things because it's not an overtly negative thing. There's also the whole like, I can say all Asians are smart because it's not a bad stereotype, it's a compliment.
I think these two gentlemen, Stephanie, are plants. No, I mean that because I like the term you even use, fetishization. It's in the book. and the hyper sexualization, etc., etc. And your analysis, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Spot on again. So you two must be plants. Is there any other thoughts that are not plants from the university? Thank you. Those are very intellectually deep responses. So clearly this whole alien in their own land. She could be a second generation Korean American, but phenotypically, right, she is racialized as being a foreigner. This is real. Any Starbucks drinkers in the room? Okay. These cases where Asian American patrons and customers enter and the barista writes in marker, chinky eyes, really illustrate how, well, certainly racist people can be, but how it's deemed okay to do that, right? Whoever did that may have intended it to be a joke, but that's no laughing matter. I can't tell you, remember the Jolly Green Giant picture that I shared? How many times people would talk about my eyes and different stereotypical things, right? And we'll get to those today. But this is an example, I would say, of othering, clearly, at Starbucks. I think of, and another book that I've worked on, and it's in press right now, a woman wrote how stereotypes of Asians should be deemed epithets, racial epithets, right? Racialized epithets. Because an epithet is an adjective or descriptive phrase expressing a quality characteristic of a person or a thing meant, right? So there are many epithets. You don't need to rehearse them in your mind. There are many racist epithets. But when you think of Asian Americans, one epithet that has been used quite frequently is calling Asian Americans gooks. Right? If you've seen the movie Gran Torino, I have edited a clip for students that shows how many times Clint Eastwood uses zipperhead, gook, all of these racist terms. Right? Has anyone seen the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story? Right? The frequency, the periodicity, and the regularity of us hearing terms really codifies them and conditions us, right? And so I would argue that in those movies that repeatedly use these epithets, it's problematic, certainly. But also we can think of geek as an epithet that is used to describe, as this gentleman has said earlier, that Asians are all doing well in school. Somehow, just by the very nature of being Asian American. So, think about that for a moment. Here's more evidence, I would say, of this use of epithets in just general areas of life. You go to Papa John's, right? the one is a New York Papa John's, and the person wrote Lady Chinky Eyes. Now that's absurd and uncalled for, and those people should be dismissed and fired immediately for those actions. And I would say that racist receipts impact people of color. If you're black, all people of color have experienced similar things because it's been documented and it's been written about. But I draw attention today to Asian Americans specifically. Ching Chong, etc. Now, with Halloween approaching, there's always the danger. There's always the danger. And as a foundations professor, when I go into costume shops, I always look at the costumes. And clearly we know, right? We know very well there are some very problematic costumes of not just Asian Americans, but of black people, of Native Americans, of many populations, right? And I would caution us to think of this as problematic, right? That they're not costumes, right? These are people we're talking about, and we cannot commoditize them to make money. Like you dress up as a geisha, or you dress up with chopsticks, in your hair or what have you. Very insensitive. So part of reading the model minority stereotype then becomes, who are we talking about? What is the face of Asian America? Well, I would say the face of Asian America is very diverse and very heterogeneous. Here's a table that really talks about the number of ethnicities, languages, and even poverty levels with and among the Asian American population. There's intergroup differences and intra-group differences here, right? Not all Asian Americans are East Asian, right? There are different geographical areas of the world that comprise Asia. Now don't laugh on the next slide. Okay, you can laugh if you want. But any of you, and if this describes you, I don't intend, it's not my intention to poke fun at you. But let's talk about other people who might have tattoos of an Asian language, right? So you might have a kanji or a hangul or a different, a Chinese character, right? Here's a gentleman, right, who gets a tattoo on his arm and doesn't know how to read that language, and it basically says, I'm a dumb person, right? He thinks it's like love, power, strength, but it's pretty much says, I'm foolish. So I feel bad for him. I feel, whoever was the tattoo artist, wow. Must have been having a bad day to knowingly, perhaps, or maybe unintentionally, tattoo this gentleman with a tattoo that says, right, you're foolish. Now, the stereotype, when we read it critically, I think a situation like this is really important. You talked about fetishization. I think this is an example of that. Sinophilia, right? Asian files. There's a lot of Asian file folks that I've encountered just in life. I'm a young man, but I've seen it. It's essentially, right, white people are engrossed in love, infatuated with Asian culture and Asian, to the point of certainly tattooing their bodies, but also doing other things. But I haven't seen this. Have you seen something like this? Tell me, please. No? Why? Why wouldn't that ever happen? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I think part of it is the perception of kanji and other sort of character-based languages as exotic, and more inherently interesting.
Why is it exotic though? Let's do a group think here. Why is an Asian character language you know, exotic. A, B, C, D, all 26. I don't find those exotic. Yes.
Because it's not something we're familiar with. If it's something that we don't see on a regular basis, it's like new to us. Like,
Who's the we?
Americans, yes.
Americans, mainstream Americans, dominant culture. Okay. Is that why when I go to Target, I see home decor and there's like little placards with Asian languages and it says like peace in this home and I don't know if it says peace in this home. It could have said like, right, something totally different. Okay, I think you're right. Yes?
This is making me think about why we don't use other languages that don't use Roman characters, you know, like why we're not getting Arabic tattoos or whatever. I think that there's also a perception regarding Chinese characters that there are all these proverbs and beautiful poetry.
Yeah.
And so we're just trying to kind of use that and say like I'm a wise person or I'm like a thoughtful person.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation. I think you're right as well.
So I think that like if there's like this perception that if you decorate your home with items belonging to another culture or whatever, you become cultured yourself. Like you're a cultured person that's not just like white. Like you understand like all these other things and like there's like Americans want to be like immersed in different cultures and like there's like this we want I don't know to be cultured and therefore if we buy these things or whatever we're cultured.
Okay, yeah, I think there's an element at play what you're describing as well. I think that we need to think about the next slide very, very well when we read the model minority stereotype. And what I'm speaking about is orientalizing people. And Edward Said really talks a lot about orientalizing and Orientalism. And so I want to show something. This is not a skit like the first video I showed you. This is a real video created by, and I'm in the field of education, by K-12 education leaders in Washington. So take a look at this.
Hi, my name is Scott Stephen. I'm part of the AWSP Professional Development Team. Today we're coming to you live from the AWSP Dojo Center. We're doing this to remind you about our upcoming technology training on May 7th. As you can see, there's a need for principals to lead with technology, and this training is for you. On May 7th, you'll have the opportunity to come learn about some of the basic skills around using your smart technology. Or maybe you want to learn how to be more productive using things like Evernote. Maybe you're one of those principals that's always wanted to use Twitter to increase your communications to your school community or for your own professional development. Maybe you just need us. We only have 50 spots and those spots are filled up fast. So you better get to our website right away and register for our technology workshop. See you on May 7th.
Okay, let's be media savvy here and analyze and interrogate what you just saw. What was orientalized? What made that video an example of Orientalism?
It's cute.
The music,
It looks like,
the audio.
yeah.
What made it as such? Because I think you're right. I think most would agree. What about it inherently made it?
I think together with the background also.
So the motif, the
Yeah.
background certainly, and the music. You may have heard that music in the background music in movies or television. What other orientalizing is going on in that segment we just saw? Martial arts.
Really heavy quote fingers around martial arts.
Pardon?
Some really heavy quote fingers around the words martial arts.
Oh, martial arts. Yeah, that wasn't a Bruce Lee at all. Okay, other things.
Asians in technology, since they were teaching tech and, you know,
Thank you.
applications that, okay, you know, that.
Thank you. Now, let me give you more context. In all fairness, although there's not much of it, their whole rationale was get a black belt in technology, right? It was a recruitment tool. So martial arts black belt, the dojo, and what have you, and then the audio. Were there any other contextual, visual, or auditory clues that would really illustrate Orientalism?
Well, I know something like, you know, get smarter with technology, or are you going back to the whole, like, oh, Asians are so smart? Like, that got from there.
Yeah.
You know, they really try to emphasize that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for
I
sharing.
think the other thing with the dojo and the martial arts themes is kind of this idea of Asians as disciplined and sort of like able to focus very heavily. That sort of comes up. The idea of the stoic master of something.
What about the gentlemen, the actors? Call them actors. the sit-in folk, the guys that probably sit behind a cubicle every day, but then they're like, hey, we're gonna produce this film. You get to kick a hacky sack and do all this kung fu stuff. What about them? Their genders? Men? Straight, probably straight. We don't know. Yeah, we don't know that. And in all fairness, we don't know. But we can ascribe that they're males, and clearly their race.
White.
White.
White dudes.
White dudes. Yes, white dudes. So that's a very crude but realistic. You know, I didn't make this up. I actually had a colleague who emailed me, says, check this out. I went to the website. I actually captured the video because I knew they would take it down. And they did. But I have it, so it's not going anywhere, right? So be aware what you post on Facebook or anything. It's out there. Here's something that's out there, and ESPN can change their website, but it's out there, right? People have gotten it. Now I see heads bobbing. What's going on here? The situation. Can someone break it down for us? What happened on ESPN?
Yes, and Jeremy Lin was the reason the Knicks lost.
Okay. So the Knicks, at the time, Lin was playing for the Knicks, and they had lost. What's problematic with the website? Yeah, chink, right? The goo can chink. That's right. But then again, right? In all fairness, there's little of it here. A chink in the armor. What does that mean? Any literary folk who know what that term means?
It was literally when a piece of armor would be loose enough to allow something to penetrate through it.
So it's a weakness, right? A weakness. So they're trying to say, hey, the weakness here. Pardon?
Because he committed 9 turnovers.
Yeah, he committed 9 turnovers. But what is wrong with that caption with Jeremy? Yeah, he's Asian. Right? So here is an example. But, you know, going back to this theme of reading the word in the world, have you ever heard of the expression, history repeats itself? Yeah, that's a very common expression. History repeated itself because here it's with ESPN, it happened before on a different website, not with Jeremy, but with figure skaters. Michelle Kwan. And Michelle Kwan was, right, made out to be foreign. Going back to the first thing, right, an alien in America. You know, she was born in California. And the headlines at that time really implied that she was not American. But in fact, she is American, right? And so when people were in uproar about this website, I thought, wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen, this has happened on numerous occasions. And it's cyclical. And you know what? I would argue that it's not going to be the last, unfortunately. Right? Insensitivity. I mean, and even before Jeremy Lin, Yao Ming had experienced similar experiences. What about this case? Anyone hear about this case? I believe, don't quote me on this, it was at least a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I was out in San Francisco at a conference, and this happened right after, and I said, whoa, you know, I had just flown into San Francisco, and then this airline, Asiana Flight 214, basically did a nosedive. Anyone fly into San Francisco? It's kind of a difficult land. I'm not a pilot, but I've been told it's difficult to land your plane there. And this Asiana flight did a nosedive into the tarmac. This is the news talking about the pilots of Asiana. Right? This is on the news. What would be problematic here? Yeah.
Those are obviously not real names. And they all sound, about Something Wong.
Something Wong?
All four of the pilots have names that
Holy
phonetically
yeah.
sound like
We too low?
jokes. That's
Yeah, we're too low, Captain something wrong, holy F, and then Dang Dang Ow, I don't know what that would be. But okay. So you said it was clearly the wrong, wrong name. But why would they report on it?
someone I remember reading something about this, someone posted these names up somewhere, and the news was so desperate to be first to the story, they didn't call Asiana or anyone to make sure these were actually the names.
It was an intern.
It was an intern. It's always an intern.
Any of you study media or journalism? Any of you? Okay, learn from their mistake, right? Check your facts, right? Even if you're second to get the real facts, because no one wants to have to put it in that. Previous corrections have to be made, right? But yeah, there was no real double checking or proofing of that, right? And I think the same quote unquote innocent mistake could be seen here. It's a cool, catchy headline. It's novel, and they'll move forward. Or in this case, just in expediency and time, they didn't cross-check, right? But I would say that this example, it increases the salience of identity, right? Because your names really express a lot, right? I mean, some of you have names that maybe it was your grandfather, grandmother, your mother, and it's passed down from generation, or there's a significance behind it. And by highlighting names that are different than, the normative group, really increases the saliency of the Asian American identity. Now, we've mentioned, and some of you have mentioned, that Asians are racialized as being all intelligent. If that were true, all of the Asians, in terms of outcomes, would be on this high end, the more ideal, optimal high end, right? So whether this would be educational attainment, income level, prestige, what have you, right? That would be true. But the truth of the fact is that Asian Americans, if you bring them all together and you analyze their outcomes, they're bimodal. There's high end and low end, right? And we perseverate on the high end. We always we remember the high end. We don't remember the low end, right? So I would say if you're a poor immigrant from China, you're going to be on the low end for poverty, maybe sheltered language, maybe even health, right? But if you're a second generation Korean, the child of parents who have advanced degrees, etc., you are more advantaged. You're going to be at the higher end of that distribution. So this is one tenet that's critical to understand. Bimodality of Asian American outcomes. Income levels. Another misnomer is that Asian Americans somehow are wealthier than white people. It's a material fact that people believe, a lot of people buy into that belief. But it's false. And it's false for a variety of reasons. The first of which is here on this slide. When we compare household income, right? If you look at Asian American household income and white household income, you would look at the bars and, oh, look, it's higher for the Asian Americans. They're better off. But statistically, the average household size for Asian Americans is 3.3 people. Right? There's intergenerational family. Certainly that's true in white families as well. But for whites, the average household size is 2.5. So there's one consideration, right? So you'd have to take that bar graph and divide it by how many people are in that household. That would be a per person income, right? Another reason why the statistics are skewed is understanding where Asian Americans live and where high concentrations of Asian Americans live. And for instance, California. Well, what do you know about California and the standard of living in California? It's expensive, right? And so you have two things at play, right? One is your salaries are going to have to be a little higher to account for cost of living. Now, that's another story about minimum wage. That's horrible, right? We need to pay folks more. But for the most part, if you live in states and spaces and cities that are more costly, it's going to inflate those numbers. So we have to take into account household size as well as geography. Okay. What about test scores? You know, another fallacy is this notion that Asian Americans test off the charts for high stakes tests. ACT, SAT, right? High stakes tests. Well, we have to understand that Asian Americans have the widest standard deviation for any racial group. In other words, among Asians and Asian Pacific Islanders, there are higher numbers of scores that deviate from the mean score than is true for other groups. So we can't really, and this is statistics here, we can't just look at mean score, oh, their mean's higher. That's highly problematic because there's actually proportionally and percentage-wise a lot of folks that score on that lower end of the distribution. Okay. Any of you watch Family Guy or have seen it? Okay, you'll like this. This is a Family Guy clip here.
You guys notice how many Asians there are at this school? I mean, how do they all get so smart?
I don't know. Guess that's just the way God made them.
Gentlemen, I give you the Asian. Ooh. Compact, hairless, and fiercely intelligent. Penises, while tiny, are extremely efficient. We're projecting 10 billion within 5 years. Also, there'll be different varieties that will all hate each other for some reason.
Do they eat just like regular food?
No, the opposite.
I didn't understand that last part, the opposite. But at any rate, again, if you go back to the first slide, the Jolly Green Giant picture of Nicholas, right? I mentioned that people would pick on me for my eyes and my height, and at that time I was thinner. I mean, I feel pretty thin, but I put on some weight. I used to be really, really thin. And they would tease me a lot, right? And the research is very clear. Asian Americans are bullied at the highest rates for a variety of reasons. But in that clip, you know, I can't tell you the amount of penis jokes that came to my attention. Or the bad driving. When I was 16, I became a driver, right? bad driver stereotype. All of the stereotypes you can consider, I've experienced and heard of. Again, if we read the stereotype though, where do those things come from? I've heard people say, but Dr. Hartlep, stereotypes, they're predicated on a kernel of truth. And I ask, well, what the hell does that mean? What a kernel of truth, what does that mean? Certainly it could be based on a history. So here you have a peer-reviewed journal, the title of which, Cranial Size and IQ in Asian Americans from Birth to Age 7. Right, this was published in, believe it or not, a journal called Intelligence. What irony there, right? And this, Philippe Rushton is a notorious person who people have known his work. He's since died, I believe, of cancer. But Philippe Rushton was a pseudoscientist. He was a eugenicist. Anyone have heard that term before in your courses? Eugenics, right? Eugenics is this whole idea of breeding the perfect race. There's elements of it, obviously, in the Holocaust. But Philippe Rushton in this article basically is making this argument that the IQ levels of Asian kids were high, and they had larger head sizes. Now, going back to my statement, there's a kernel of truth. Well, does that mean, because I had a big head, which I do, and that's another thing I got teased at. I had a big head, which may be true or untrue. But I certainly, at that time, I don't find myself highly intelligent, high IQ, or what have you. But in this research, he's making that suggestion. Right? And phrenology, if you're not aware of that, phrenology and physiognomy, the study of the cranial skulls and the face, there's a long legacy of that pseudoscience that has led to really damaging impacts for people. So, cranial size, but the penis stereotype, I think, right, there's a history of that in contemporary science because Richard Lynn, another eugenicist, I believe he died actually of cancer too. Maybe that's maybe that's like, for doing this problematic research that happened to him. I don't know. But at any rate, this article, right? Differences in penis length and circumference in arcade life history. Again, supposedly a peer-reviewed journal. There was a time in which these pseudoscientists, they made these crazy cases. And I know it's graphic, but it's important to share it because when we read the stereotype, we need to know this history, even when it makes us uncomfortable. These scientists were making these arguments, and they would research male genitalia. And what they found, what they concocted, was that black men had the largest penises, which there's stereotypes of that in society now. Right? And they had the lowest IQs. So large, low IQ. White men, what do you think? What do you think they found in their research for white men? Average intelligence, average penis size, and average intelligence. What did they find for the Asian Americans or Asians? Small penis and high IQ. And so that whole idea of kernel of truth, well, there's a history, clearly, right? Now, I don't think that people sit around, especially college students, I don't think you do this, have coffee and talk and say, let's create a stereotype of Asian people. And, oh yeah, I did some reading and, I read this difference in penis length and circumference study, and so let's just stereotype Asian men as having small penises and being smart. I don't think that happens, right? So the question becomes, how do we arrive at stereotypes of people? Right? Any thoughts on that? How have we come to the point in 2014 in which Asian Americans, Asians, are racialized in such a way? Yeah.
feel like when we're intimidated by a group of people, maybe we create stereotypes in order to like to feel better about insecurities or make them inferior than us in our heads.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Any other?
It's also to sort of simplify and compartmentalize things that we're not familiar with. So it's a lot easier to say, to just immediately identify someone as belonging to one group and then assign them all these characteristics than attempt to understand actual diversity and difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting because like it shows that like marginalization, regardless if it's like positive or negative, it still has like a terrible effect. Like even if it's even if it's like like that's still really offensive to Black people. You know, like just because it's still marginalizing, it's still a terrible feeling.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Any other thoughts? These are all. You guys are like grad students. Are you all grad students? No.
Well, the ones you mentioned specifically play into two sort of larger stereotypes, and one of the things about stereotypes is that they tend to propagate themselves.
Sure.
So prejudice leads to more prejudice.
Sure.
But it's this kind of thing specifically plays into the ideas of white people as like the true human sort of like average. This is what the normal person looks like, is they are white, and then these stereotypes for Asians are that they are very sort of almost like too stoic and refined and like too sort of headspace instead of being in touch with their more emotional side, and that Black people, there is a very long-standing stereotype, especially in America, of Black people sort of like more animalistic and feral, and so that would play into these ideas of like overhyped sexuality and lower intelligence.
You're right. And that's actually, it's ironic, in this study, there's some elements of that within this research. They were talking about, right, they look at how many children people have, and then, right, they make these arguments that some people, some families, some races, some cultures choose to have fewer children and raise them more, how do you say, engaged, whereas others have many more offspring and pay less attention to them. And we know that to be true in, in certain animals, right? Because the survival rates, hatchlings or, they have a lot because predators will eat them, and whereas mammals, you tend to have fewer offspring and raise and nurture them. So that's interesting. I haven't heard that. I think you're absolutely right, though, about the whole comparing Asians and African Americans. Really. I decided to change my talk at the end today based on my experience from yesterday's talk, because I felt as though I was speaking at the group as opposed to engaging folks. And I think no one likes sitting through an hour and plus minute talk and just sit there passive. So I thought, what better way to engage you is to ask some discussion questions and kind of work things out, and I can answer any questions you have. And so I'd like to begin now for the duration of the talk, engaging and kind of going over these discussion questions together. So I want us all to work hard and participate here. So my first question, I just throw it out, is how can we get anti-model minority stereotype research into the hands of those who could benefit from it? And maybe the first part, before we can even respond to that original question, is who could benefit from learning about the stereotype of Asians and why it's problematic? So anyone, you can answer anything or pose a question, but let's begin there. Yes?
Everyone, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone?
I think everyone could benefit from it because it's a terrible, destructive thing. So I think it's important.
Let's go with that then. How do we get it into the hands?
I was thinking how the media would probably be the first step, because people are so influenced by the media, especially today in such a technological age, that when we see things like that on the news
You know, yesterday I had a call from a reporter, and he said, you know, I was trying to talk to you about, I was at a talk you gave at Illinois State, that's my home institution, on Ferguson, Missouri. We gave a talk on Ferguson, and he said, call me back. So I call him back, and he said, yeah, I was at your talk, it was a great talk, I want to talk to you about racism and police racially profiling people of color. Do you know any black people that could do this, blah, 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 blah. And I said, sir, why are you so focused on black people? You know, racism impacts Asian people as well as other marginalized groups. To which he responded, oh, okay, and then basically just dismissed my question. And so my question, you're right, the media, why does the media really tend to overplay black issues and we receive not much media on Asian American issues? Does anyone see that? I mean, can you think consciously of a story you've heard recently in the media and the newspaper about Asian American issues? So why are Asians so invisible in America? Does anyone have a theory that could explain that? Because they are. We're very invisible.
Sorry to keep talking so much. Part of it is the whole model minority stereotype. There's this idea of, you know, Asians are integrating the way we want them to. But there's also, this is especially true in California at least, there's a very large culture of self-segregation in Asian communities, especially in first-generation Asian communities. So a lot of my friends, I went to a theater school, so we kind of pulled people from everywhere in Orange County, but one of my friends lived in a part of Diamond Bar, California, that was almost entirely Chinese and Taiwanese immigrants. There was virtually no other racial groups represented there. And it wasn't a poor part of the city, it was still doing perfectly fine, but I also happened to live like about 10 miles away from Little Saigon, which was almost entirely a Vietnamese population, just overwhelmingly Vietnamese all in sort of one neighborhood. And then of course there's Chinatown in San Francisco is predominantly Asian. There's parts of Anaheim that are predominantly Asian. And so it's this sort of idea of Asians keeping to their own is, I think, part of why they don't show up as much. There's not as much interaction, or at least not publicly in sort of violent ways that happens in places like Ferguson and everywhere else.
But is that explanation blaming the victim?
I'm not trying to say that it's. Sure. I'm not trying to say that that's like it's Asian people's fault they're invisible. It's just more this idea of. I think I think white America has this tendency to sort of out of sight, out of mind things, and so I think it's this sort of idea of, you know, or maybe even, this is also a terrible expression, but the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So places where we see very easy to sell stories. It's a lot easier to sell a story on violence and visible oppression than it is to sell. The last story I read about Asian American oppression was the lack of Asian representation in theater. There's a very small representation for Asian Americans in theater, and George Takei had a whole thing about that. But
sure. Okay. I saw other hands. I want to hear from you. So who was it?
It was
yes.
me, but he got it.
He got it? Okay. Anything to add to it, or did he say it?
No, I was going to add on to him, but
okay.
Covered it.
Okay. Any other thoughts or opinions or experiences? Yes?
Well, in the media, I mean, a lot of the time we're covering, you know, not great stuff like robberies and other various crimes. And since that is a part of our stereotype of Asian Americans, but we don't see Asian Americans as like a crime-doing people, that might also be why they don't make it into the media, because that isn't just part of how we portray them. We just ignore those stories when they do happen.
Have you heard of the Virginia Tech shooting a while back? Who was the shooter?
He was Asian, right?
Yeah, he's Korean. Did you hear that story recently, past spring, about a Korean, again, I'm Korean, a Korean male who fabricated a bomb hoax at Harvard? Eldo Kim was his name. No, why didn't you never heard that? It's true. Again, these are cases, right? It was in national attention, but he had an exam and he emailed in a bomb threat. They caught him. They traced his email. He made a fake email address and he thought he could go outside of it and not be caught, but he was detected because he used campus Wi-Fi. But right, the suspicion was people believe he was facing immense pressure, and he didn't feel prepared for the exam, and so he thought, hey, I will do this and I'll get an extra day of studying and what have you. But now he's probably in federal prison, right? So, but these other cases, you're right. I think that the media, if it bleeds, it leads. It reports on things that are sexy, that sell, right? And the model minority stereotype is sexy because we can, right, proclaim, look at this model minority, and it can be used as a political and rhetorical tool to exonerate people from believing that the world is unequal, right? Because if Asians are doing well, then the blacks and Latinos, they certainly, they're failing because it's their own fault. Yeah.
I was just going to suggest that maybe part of this is about how some of the origins of the model minority stereotype actually are associated with like middle class African Americans, and that there's a sense that, as you were just saying, right, there's a sense of like a failure to live up to that, like a media dominant culture sense that African Americans have sort of failed as model minorities, right? And there's a kind of, for lack of a better way of putting it, there's a kind of like replacement thing happening, and then an invisibility associated with like the Asian American model minority status, if that makes sense.
I think of it through also, to piggyback off what you said, is slavery. So I think of slaves. Did slaves ever get reparations for being enslaved? No, they're still waiting for their mule and their acreage, right? Now, did Asian Americans receive reparations for certain atrocities that had happened to them?
An apology and a small amount of money.
A small amount of money and an apology. And those might not do it justice, but I think symbolically they show the very nature of white attitudes, that they can be seen and treated as honorary whites.
I can't remember which era in the 1900s, either like around World War I or like the 1950s or around the gold rush. Weren't there laws in like California or in the West Coast that like laws specifically for Asian Americans? I can't remember.
Laws for them, such as?
Like, I can't put my finger on it, but it was just something attacking them, some unfair law.
Oh, a lot of unfair laws.
Segregation laws, yeah, that's what I mean.
Yep. And wage laws.
Wage laws, minors' taxes, immigration laws.
There was the gentleman's agreement with China where we would only allow in a certain amount of Chinese immigrants, and China would agree to only send over a certain amount of immigrants.
So in '66, I said, in January, that's when the myth was born. And then a year before, two major milestones happened that really set into motion, right? One was the publication of the Moynihan Report, which really blamed blacks for having a culture of poverty, et cetera, et cetera. But then also, in terms of laws, was the Hart-Celler Act, 1965, which really changed immigration as we know it. At that moment, folks from Asia, Latin America, and Caribbean were able to immigrate, and they were highly educated. It was a completely different pipeline than times previously when we barred, excluded Asian, Chinese Exclusion Act, and other forms of immigration. So on the surface, we have a lot going on, right, when we read it. We have to read the history, we have to read popular culture, popular press, as we have done so, and we've kind of established everyone could benefit from it, what are ways that we could penetrate these people and get it in the hands so that they can actually learn something from it? Any strategies? I'm picking your brain. Any thoughts about it? Social media is one avenue. Any other thoughts of how we can? These small lectures are great, and hopefully you can take ideas you hear here and share them, right? There's a multiplier effect. So hopefully, I mean, how many people we have? If you tell 10 people, you multiply it by a factor of 10, we're talking significant people. But beyond this multiplier effect in social media, any other strategies? Yep.
Educate the media, first of all, because the media is what sells to people. And if the media is not brought into tune with the Asian community and what the positives are, then they'll continue to, the Asian community will continue to be left out.
My question is, because I'm a critical race theorist, and there's a tenet of critical race theory called interest convergence, and it's this idea that civil rights and justice and equity never occur until there's alignment with the majority and the oppressed. And so my question is, why would the media even listen to this message? Do they have a stake in it? Or do they benefit from talking about the stereotype and perpetuating it? Any thoughts? But I agree. I think we need to talk to the media. Help me to think perhaps strategies. How could we strategize the media?
There are a lot of Asians within the media. Linda, what's her name? Linda Sue, and I work for the Chicago Midwest TV Academy. So there are avenues in regards to getting it in the hands of the people within the media industry to bring it forward.
Okay, so we need to definitely get it into the hands of people within the media, connectors, and people that have influence.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah.
Accessing alternative media also.
Alternative media.
Like Al Jazeera. Democracy Now. Good places to go for a different story. Not a single story.
So get in where you fit in. I would say those people that are engaged with that already, they're not the ones that need the medicine, right? They're not the sick. They're healthy, they know, they get it. But I would agree that's an alternative. I'm giving a TED Talk on this. And you know, the whole idea of TED Talk is ideas worth spreading. I really hope that, and you should check it out. It's in October. Or strike that from November. You'll be able to see that. Hopefully we can spread this idea further. Who knows? Okay, let's move on to 2 for a moment. And interject if anyone has thoughts or sentiments you want to share. What strategies can we employ to debunking the stereotype, right, once and for all? Is this even possible? So we talked about bimodal distribution. We talked about heterogeneity. We talk about household income and understanding per person. But that's really academic, isn't it? That's higher ed stuff. That's professorial stuff. The people on the streets, right, when they go to Giordano's, that's probably not what's entering their mind, right? How can we make it accessible? And what strategies? You know, one strategy might be counter stories. You share stories that invalidate the myth. But what are your thoughts on that? Are there other strategies we can employ?
I mean, a lot of us in this room are from a class regarding multiculturalism, and one of my biggest takeaways so far has just been that we need to acknowledge that we are all biased and just kind of work from that point. So just taking it down to the individual level and calling it out when we see it, like if a friend says something to me, that just sounds a little off, or if they laugh at those fake names that were posted in the news, just kind of calling that to attention and just, saying maybe this is not the best reaction to have, or maybe not the best thing to say, and here's why, and then just have those conversations, because I think being American really has its own set of issues. There's so many different cultures here and so many different problems that we've created within that, that I think we've almost gotten to a point where we're so afraid to even acknowledge that we are different publicly. You know, we have to start dismantling that wall.
How do we measure change? So if it's at the individual, I often hear that change needs to occur at the institutional level, and now I'm hearing, and I would agree, that change has to happen at the individual level. How do we measure progress if we're having an impact and that the stereotype is becoming less salient or it's going away as opposed to becoming stronger?
Maybe when the individual starts changing the institution. So like since the individual started changing, then everyone like started moving and progressing, and then like the institution realized, wow, the people are right. You know?
Yeah, I think that's a smart response and thought to have, that as people change, hopefully they are housed within institutions, hopefully they can change. I'm an optimistic person, but I tend to want to be proactive. Like if I'm just sitting idle, I feel like my time is not being well spent. But oftentimes I think I'm in a rocking chair. I'm moving a lot, but I'm not moving forward much, right? And so that's something that we can consider. Any other thoughts before we go to, yeah?
Well, you asked like how can we tell if there's a positive effect. I think one of the easiest ways to like measure the strength of stereotypes is by looking for it in media.
Okay.
Because in general the stories we tell tend to reflect our mindsets. So if we see instances of particular stereotypes popping up in movies and television and books more frequently that are still being published like right now, then obviously the stereotypes aren't going away. But when we see that start to decrease, I think the stereotypes are also starting to get a bit weaker.
Yeah, I would agree. I think right now the media, and I'm biased, but I think there's a tendency of, there's a resurgence on really class conflict. I'm seeing that in a lot of movies, whether it be, and I know they come from books, but whether that be the Hunger Games, like dystopian pieces, right, class conflict, but then also like the Purge movies, you know, where you kill each other, but basically the poor people are getting killed, and even The Maze, like this idea of like you're locked up, right? So I think you're right. It's a great bellwether to kind of see the direction of our national attention, certainly. Entertainment and education, they should go hand in hand. Let's go to 3. What can be done to push back? What are tools in our tool belt, so to speak, to use? Is it simply enough to say, you're wrong, they're not all smart? Is that effective?
I think like our like the way we educate our population on like globalization is really harmful to Asian Americans because it's created such a culture of competitive nature, which is like what makes us like look at Jeremy Lin as like a joke, even though he's like better than anyone. Like he was so good. So I think like education, like as far as globalization goes, should be used less as an economic tool and more as like what we can gain from their culture, as opposed to what we can gain from international relations with them. You know.
Yeah, tell me more. I think you're honest.
Well, I'm just saying, like, I think that there's so, like, if Asian philosophies were taught as much as like a lot of Western philosophies are taught in American classrooms, like the philosophy, then we wouldn't. I think all these are like educational issues, but like I think that one in particular, if you were able to open up like a facet for like knowledge between cultures, I think like there wouldn't be any, there'd be so much less tension.
When will that happen? Do you think that will happen? What will cause that to happen?
I don't know. I don't know. I feel like we've already hit like a boiling point, but I don't know. maybe media presence needs to come first because we have to convince everyone that this is an issue first, and since Asian Americans aren't even on the news, then why would we make a move towards it?
Yeah.
Well, the unfortunate truth of a lot of social and scientific and every other kind of change is that it usually has to start at a sort of base level, because a lot of people at the top of their fields tend to be very old and very entrenched in their opinions, and it's very difficult to change a 76-year-old professor's opinion on race, but it is very much easier to shape a 5th grader's opinion on race. So I think what generally has to happen is you have to start at the bottom, especially enacting policy changes in schools and the media that we make for children, and then, to be perfectly honest, you just have to wait for the old white men to die out.
No,
progress in almost every field has usually been accomplished by waiting for the old white men to die out. No, it's true. Albert Einstein's theories of physics only became accepted when the old white men who said, there's no way that this is how the universe works, the universe is static, goddammit, finally died and went away. The Louis Pasteur's theory of germs only went away when the old white men who said, no, the things just happen. Infection just spontaneously happens from nowhere. Germs don't exist. Shut up.
I think something is to be said. No offense if you have a white dad and he's old. but relatedly, I've looked at what's your name, sir?
Henry.
Henry. I've looked. My grad assistant and I. We've been looking at professors, in particular in the field of education, because that's my field. And we've looked at how old they are, their race, their gender. But we've looked especially at, quote unquote, big fish, right? Yeah. Endowed professors, distinguished professors. What do you think we found in the education professors? And we're about to publish this. What do you think we found in terms of the composition and demographics of said population?
Hugely old.
Hugely old, yep.
Old white men.
Old white men. We call it pale, stale, and male. Right? Pale, stale, and male. And I think you're right. There's some truth. However, then I started to think, right? Who are their understudies? Who are their proteges? What students are these endowed professors training? And I would speculate, I don't have empirical data to support it. Social network theory would say that they're inculcating those morals and beliefs and those skill sets into white males, right? So the problem is, right, white males that die off, they bring in new, younger, and they become old. So I think, but I think you're onto something. I don't want to criticize what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. So hear me when I say that. Yes.
I think we also don't listen to like elder activists, right? It's like academia gets to be the space where like knowledge is produced. Whereas like you have people alive today who were part of the civil rights movement. You have people alive today who like were a huge part of like making massive social change, right? But like how often are they interviewed or like consulted about like what change looks like or how we do this work, right? Yeah, so I was just thinking in terms of kind of troubling the age question, right? Because it is. It's like it's the pale, stale, and male, right? It's all of the above. But also like there's a reinventing the wheel, as Audre Lorde puts it, right? Where it's like if you're not talking to older generations of people who have been a part of like big social change, then it's like, well, you have to start from scratch. But they have a lot of like wisdom to offer.
That's such a beautiful insight. Thank you for sharing. I think you're spot on with that too. Because also, right, elders could be, they could be replicating an oppressive status quo, or they could actually have fought for decades, right? And then as they're coming up. And that's a lesson I've learned I could share with you in writing the book and also doing the research for only, 7 or 8 years of my life, is that I found that the methodologies and approaches have been stale, have been, like you said, recycled. And there are less novel approaches. And I can tell you a few things that I believe are path-breaking right now in the research on the stereotype. One being the cost and consequences of internalizing said myth, not only for Asian people, but for white people, black people. That's up and coming. Also, I think complicity, something that I've been trying to write a lot about, so a shameless self-plug, but talking about how actually, how hegemonic it can be, that Asian people, myself not included, could be intentionally and or unintentionally perpetuating the myth, believing that they benefit from said hegemonic system to receive material benefits, right? And that's really problematic. The whole disaggregation piece is really sexy right now. A lot of people are doing disaggregation work, and it's important work, like Dr. Teranishi at UCLA, and he's been a wonderful mentor to me. But we need, like you said, and what was your name?
I'm Heather.
Heather, as Heather said, we do need to talk to those who have come before us, and use them, because they've hopefully fought for civil rights and justice and things that we want and deem important. So I think that's a beautiful insight. Thank you for sharing about it. Anything else? Any other thoughts? I know you have ideas, so I want to extract them. I want you to verbalize them so we can all hear and learn from you. Yeah.
So this is somewhat similar to how you said that Asians themselves might perpetuate the myth.
Mm-hmm.
I guess like one thing I would take away from this is, as an Asian American who has not ever been sensitive to this issue, I will not, when someone like makes a joke or whatever, I won't laugh at it or something. Whereas before I would, like I myself have found it okay maybe to make a comment, to make a comment about like, oh, this Asian, like she's Asian, she's smart. And as other people around me like see that I'm Asian, I make the comment, like they kind of feel like it might be okay too. And I feel like a lot of like minorities might do something similar, like if they make a joke or something, like other people see it's okay. So I mean, for me, that's gonna be the biggest takeaway, to like not, to like be more careful about like how I treat them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really important. Excellent. Very important. And also, I mean, you can do this work even if you're not Asian, Asian American, or biracial, multiracial. You know, white people can do it. Black people. It's not exclusively, you know, a topic that you have to be, quote unquote, an insider per se to do it. Any other thoughts about any questions? I guess we have a little bit of time. Are there any questions? And then I want to close by just saying something too. But is there any questions that can answer about anything that you're interested to know? Unrelated or related? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually curious about the Tiger Mom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Situation, yeah. In aspects to education.
Yeah, so Amy Chua, if you're not familiar with her, a Yale law professor, she wrote the Battle Hymn, Tiger Mom. Her husband, Jed Rubenfield, they wrote another recent book, Triple Threat, Triple Package. And the Triple Package, it really talks about these cultures that are successful, like Mormon, Asian. My thoughts about it on tiger parenting is it's over-essentializing. And one criticism Amy Chua has received is not taking her own, not being self-reflective. Now here you have an endowed professors, right? In fact, going back to the early research, there were only 8 Asian American endowed professors in field education. But that's what we found, so underrepresented. But here you have an endowed professor at Yale, Amy Chua, who very much was privileged. Parents were highly educated professors. All I can say is probably middle income, if not better. And she doesn't take into account her own upbringing. So I think whenever we talk about culture or parenting or what have you, we always have to have intersectional approaches. We have to think about race, gender, sexual orientation, class, positionality, political economy. We can't just gravitate and just look at one particular factor, right? The models that we use and our paradigms have to be more nuanced and multifaceted, because society operates that way. When you leave this space, you're going to be going out into Chicago or different classrooms, and your identities and positionalities change, right? And so one criticism that has been lodged at Amy Chua is not being self-reflective. And unfortunately, I would say that she is complicit in perpetuating this stereotype. But she is benefiting from her book. And she's benefiting from all the media appearances she has. Talk about media, right? The Wall Street Journal and all these media outlets. So I need a discussion. Anyone can hook me up to talk with the Wall Street Journal or someone, New York Times. You know, I'd love to talk to the media and say, look, you know, instead of inviting Amy, you need to invite these other more critical people. So, any other thoughts or questions? As a teacher, we think of wait time. Wait time is it? Any people studying to be a teacher? No teachers. Okay, so wait time, right? You're aware of it. You have to ask a question and wait because students are processing. So I'll give wait time. If there's any other questions or comments? We'll pass that uncomfortable moment of silence. Okay, that's fine if there aren't. I'd like to do something. If you could write down my email address, it's kind of something I'd like to do. NDHARTL at ILSTU, it's spelled ILSTU.edu. Okay, so I'm going to make this announcement. Some of you have smartphones, so you won't be able to do it now, because I think that would be unfair. What I want you to do is later this evening, send me an email, and the first couple of people that I get emails from, I'll send you a copy of the book or another book. And so just free. You just send me your address, and I'll mail it, and then you'll have a free book. So the rules of it, can't do it on your phone now, because that would be unfair. Yes?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat your email?
Yeah, my email is ndhart@ilstu.edu. The only rule is don't do it on your smartphone now, right? We'll say at 5 o'clock or later. And the first couple of people that say, hey, my name is blah, 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 I'll send you a book, okay? So I'll repeat the email,
Nicholas, I'll get it
Oh,
right.
okay, yeah. NDH.
Is it, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
We can see it.
Yeah, we can see it, Stephanie. NDHARTL.
There is an L there.
Oh no, not EP, just L. Yep. At ILSTU. Yep. No problem. At ILSTU. ILSTUE.edu. Thank you, Stephanie. And after 5 o'clock, just send me an email, and I'd love to send you a book. So I really want to thank you for being engaging. Hopefully you learned something, and hopefully we can multiply it. So talk about it. If you tell 10 people about the stereotype, you know, we're going to have an impact at the individual level, certainly at the institutional level.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for Nicholas for coming to DePaul for 2 days. We were really lucky to have him. On your way out, if I could ask you to please fill out the evaluation that was in your chair. The data you give us helps us know if we're being effective in our programming for our department. We really appreciate it if you fill that out and turn it in on your way out. Thank you.